Well, it looks like fall's upon us once again, and you know what that means. Kids go back to school. I have a lot of fond memories that kind of flood my imagination and my memory at this time of year. One of which is when I was a small child, I used to carry my Partridge Family Bus lunchbox with matching thermos to school. Oh, how I wish I had that now, because I think it's worth like $1,000 or $1,200 just for a lunchbox. Well, in keeping with that kind of educational, theme this time of year, our new series starting September 7th is entitled Words That Begin with the Letter F. We're going to talk about family and living your faith in a culture that seems to have none, finances and friendships and freedom. And I'll probably like to try to work football and food into that, although I got to tell you, I'm having trouble finding biblical passages that support those weekends. Anyhow, make sure you bring some people, because I've been listening to what you've been talking about in these subjects and have really used your questions, your concerns, your insights to craft this series. So it starts September 7th. I hope you're there. I hope you bring a friend. Again, words that begin with the letter F. That was a tweet and some information we sent out to the congregation. I got to be honest with you, since we're in a group of pastors, we're always supposed to be honest. Originally, I was going to entitle the series The Other F Word, but the staff thought that might cause too many uncomfortable questions with kids. So I got to tell you, when I first got here, and I got here early, and it's kind of my nature, I went ahead and checked the schedule, and I saw speaker, bar, speaker. So I called my wife Lydia, and I really trust her a lot, and if you've met her, you know I clearly outpunted my coverage when I married her. And I said, Lyd, I go speaker, bar, me. What does that say? They have to dull your senses with alcohol so you can sustain this. So, it's great being here. I consider it a privilege. I've had the privilege of working with the Seabird Foundation for some time, and again, I thank you for this privilege. I am not so bold to believe that I'm going to fill your ministry cups to overflowing with the knowledge and insight and experience God has given us at St. Mark, but I am bound and determined to make sure that I empty mine to help you better understand maybe how we can reach more for Christ. And before I do that, I've got to introduce 7 people who've been part of my ministry from the very beginning. Take a look. One is Sally. She's a 32-year-old mom, recently now single, and really struggles financially, does work and volunteer in our food pantry, as well as is a person who needs it, and we're so happy that she can actually have it. Another person is Larry. He's a 44-year-old guy who started to work in the paper mill. So when you're in the bathrooms and you see the toilet paper there, you can thank us, because we're the ones that produce that for you. He's been in there since he's 18 years old. Nuts and bolts guy. Nuts and bolts guy. Next one, Kevin. He's 22 years old, inked, number of things. It's interesting. He gets all of his life direction, for the most part, off of Jon Stewart's show, which is challenging to say the least, right? It could have been Bill Maher. Rick is a 38-year-old businessman who owns 10 Domino's, and he's always regular in church with his family. If I'm standing on the platform or the altar and I look out, right-hand side, about 6-7 pews up, family's all there, always dressed nicely, very active. He's been with me for a long time. Henry. You all have Henry in your congregation. I think Henry came from a family of like 400, because there's a Henry in every congregation. Henry is the self-appointed captain of the old guard. He still's loving, and especially now, he loves the King James Version, and now that he has learned that, the NIV 2000 or 1984 is no longer available, he now thinks it's like a sign of the apocalypse that we have to go to the 2011. And so he's been talking about the KJV more often. And you know this because you've got people like him who say, Pastor, I'm all about evangelism. Doors open, nothing's preventing these people from coming in. Isn't that true? That's Henry. You got Henry and his relatives too. All right, Cindy works at Humana next door, 35 years old. Sadly single, very talented, highly intelligent, personable, doesn't think she really has much to offer anybody. Not really a mission at all. She doesn't think she has anything. And then there's Jim. He's 16-year-old. He's a lifelong Welser. filled with testosterone and really is not sure if the church really matters at all. Now, I've got to tell you, you probably have similar people in your congregations where you serve. But there's one difference between your people and my people. Your people are real. Those people are all imaginary. I've had them since the very beginning of my ministry, and the reason I've had that imaginary round table or that invisible pew was to help me better understand something that I think is a key to ministry. That has been for us, and that is it's imperative that you understand your own mission field. It always blows me away in our church body, and maybe in your tribe as well, where we will go ahead and prep ministries or prep missionaries and their families if they're going to China, if they're going to Africa, talking about the culture, if they're going to Indonesia, or wherever else they're going. But we don't do that in the United States as if everyone's got the same kind of mission field. And so we believe it's imperative for us to understand what our mission field is like, because I believe that your assumptions really need to fit your missionary challenges. And I don't believe our years ago, our assumptions did at all. But before we get to that, let me just kind of introduce who we are. St. Mark is a congregation that has grown rapidly by God's grace and in spite of me as one of its leaders. We have doubled and tripled and close to quadrupled now in size. We've gone from a congregation that held 2 services in one little campus, a stone's throw away from Lambeau Field, the altar of most people in Green Bay, and to suddenly go to 5 services in a 2-year period. Go from a congregation, now we have 2 other sites, and you'll hear more about that. Now looking to open 2 more video venues as well. We've gone from a congregation where the average age was around 59.5 to now 28. Marvelous. In fact, there's in a congregation of 2,200, and I'm 53, there's only 212 of us. They're over 50. So, you can't say, hey, get that album, because they're like, what? What are you talking about? They have no concept of vinyl at all. But it's we've had the privilege of really watching God work in that midst. And as I said, we believe it's just incredibly imperative that you understand that your ministry realities have to match up with your ministry that you have before you, that God has granted you. And so we've done a number of exercises through the years. Some have worked marvelously. Others, not so good, so I didn't share those with you. But, we always like to fail forward, and that's fine, and we give people permission to do that. But here's some things that we've done that have worked for us. Maybe they'll work in your ministry context. The first one is we hire people to come to church. Now let me unpack that, because I'm sure that's going to be like, what do you do? Every 2 or 3 years, since about 1996 or 1994, we go out into the community and we survey. And we ask them questions like some of you have, some of the other speakers have talked about. For example, do you know where St. Mark is? Ever heard of St. Mark? Do you know where St. Mark is? If you were setting up a church today, what's the one thing you'd make sure that churches did to serve their people in Jesus' name? Or what's the one subject you'd like your pastor to preach a series on? What would you like him to look at from God's perspective for your life? And they give us answers and so on. And then we ask, so do you have a church home? And most of them will say yes and lie, but they'll say yes or whatever. And we say, fine, great, be active. But if they say no, then we ask them, can we ask you to do a favor so we can be a better church in the community, be in the community and of the community? So we ask, would you come to our church 4 weeks in a row? We'll pay you. I'm the only person that knows who you are. Our lead pastor, John Parlow, will not know who you are at all, so I can't suck up, right? So, all right, and we'll go through many, many people. And finally, we'll get 2, 3, 4 families or individuals. And they go for a solid 4 weeks. They can go to one of 5 services. We have a Saturday night service, 3 Sunday morning, 1 Monday night. We have services 3 different days, 2 different places, 3 styles of worship, and always the same preacher. So if you're up for preaching, you're on the mound, you're throwing 5 times that weekend. And then they say, okay, yes. And then after that, we then meet with them, and the first thing we do is we give them their gift card. They're $100, so we're giving them $100 for a local grocery store. Maybe we need to up that, I don't know, price of groceries, but for festival foods. and then we ask them for their input. Because if you do the opposite way, they only give you, or they're tempted to give you only what you think you want so they can get the card. And through the years, we have learned some pretty amazing things. Back in the 1990s, remember, we had one young woman, very intelligent, just graduated, and she comes up after she went through this whole thing. She says to me, you know that book Ephesians you had on the screen? I said, yeah. She goes, this is back in the 90s. She goes, can I get that at Barnes & Noble? And I said, yeah, it comes with the library. I guess it's really a good seller. You know, it's got all of them in there. But that was a ministry. I shared that with the congregation because that was a ministry assumption. Because oftentimes we assume all families look like ours where we grew up, or we assume that they know their Bible just because they're intelligent people, or we assume that unchurched people really feel bad about being unchurched, which isn't true at all. We learned a number of things from some of the surveys. One of them, probably one of the key ones, was we believe, and we say it at St. Mark a lot, the sermon begins in the parking lot. We had people say, you know, I really appreciate that you take care of the lawn, or you have people outside even in the brutal frozen tundra of winter, shaking our hands or opening doors, because they said that impacts us. And one thing I'd encourage you to know is your sermon begins in the parking lot. If they can't trust that you keep up your lawn, what makes you think they're going to have you care for their soul? Something that we had understood. We understood that through the years now, women, a lot of times the top two things they will comment on are what? Bathrooms? Yeah, they'll even take pictures now. Look at this. Bathrooms, what else? Nursery, childcare, safe childcare. Everyone knows that. You know what guys want? Two things. First one is the 2-minute warning. Do you know what the 2-minute warning is? I mean, you know in football sense, I know that, but it's the start of the sermon. They say if you don't capture us in the first 2 minutes, they're doing this thing. They're not looking at you version. Then because they're going like this then. They're playing a game or they're setting their roster for their football, right? That's exactly what they're doing. The other thing is said, please give us something practical. Please give us something practical. Okay, if that's truth and I'm supposed to apply it in my life the next day, can you give me a couple of hints? Give me something practical. It's interesting, all the way through we've had a bunch of them. One other one we had was, and this is probably in the last 5-6 years as we've done it a couple times, and we have, again, a lot of 20-somethings that have no church home. It surprised me in a postmodern, post-Christian American culture. We heard again and again, just tell me the truth. Tell me, is that a sin or isn't it? Because I had a professor who says it isn't. I got a brother who says it is. Is that a sin or not? Can that be forgiven or not? Just take a stand. We're tired. We live in a world where it's wishy-washy, where it's a buoy floating in the ocean of political correctness. Can you tell us, is that sin or not? Is that right or wrong? Am I really forgiven? Is that really not something I should do, or is that something I should do? So that's what we did. We still do it. We'll do it next year. It's something that has worked for us to make sure we understand the mission field in which God's placed us. Another one, we tell people the truth about change. We've especially done this in the last 7 or 8 years. We work it into sermons. We work it into our writings because we're trying to educate our people because they're not any different than your people. They don't like change. We've heard a lot about it. For example, a couple things. Major reason people don't like change is because they have to do something differently. I always am amazed when people go, oh, Pastor, I'm all for change. If change is good. Church, Paul Kelm, church is all about change. Absolutely, great. Just don't make me do anything differently. Don't you get that? Absolutely. We often get that one here by us. Another one is, as you know, churches have a tendency to get stuck in a rut, especially when it comes to programming. It's kind of like that old couch. It may not work, but you still use it. You can't throw it away. And they'll go on and on and on about something that they've had for many years, knowing that it never works anymore. And I don't see that in the business community. My dad runs a corporation, and generally speaking, he says, John, if something stops selling, we stop selling it. Novel idea. In the church, when something stops selling, what do? We keep selling it, and then what do? We make excuses. Well, Jesus said it was going to be tough on this earth. Oh, we're going to be persecuted. We're just getting persecuted. These people just aren't the right kind of people. Right? It couldn't be our delivery of his wonderful message. It couldn't be the way we're portraying ourselves. It couldn't be what we're offering them in Christ, or how we're offering them, the method. No. See, the business world will just drop it or redo it. Church world will continue to sell it as long as someone is paying for it. And so we talk about that in sermons, because then when something comes up, they can't go, yeah, you're surprising us. That soak time Paul Kelm talked about, you're surprising. No? So, what are we doing here? The other thing we often talk about in change, and it's kind of a mantra now with us, is what's the best way to? What's the best way to? Everyone has their own favorite way. Everyone has their own favorite stuff. We ask the question, what's the best way to? Because that bridges the gap between your vision and what you do, your programming and everything else. What's the best way to? Because so often we're not faced with this is from the devil, so we can't do that one. This one is close to the devil, and this one's from Jesus. We don't have those options in ministry, do we? Usually there's a lot of good ones. And they could all be good. And some of them could be older, great traditions. Some could be brand new innovations. So we just go, okay, they're all good. But here's the question. What's the best way to? What's the best way to use the resources God has given us and the people he's given us in our fold and around in our community to share the message of Jesus Christ with those that don't know him? Don't tell me what's the good way. What's the way we used to do it? No. What's the best way to? Because if you don't ask that question, they'll argue. Everyone will argue their point. If you ask, what's the best way to reach the most people for Christ? These are all good ways. What's the best way? We have found that helps us alleviate a few arguments. And one final one is, in the business world, those of you in the business world know that the assumptions a team holds on to the strongest are usually its undoing. Same as in the church. Well, we got to do that because we've always done it that way. We can't let that go. We can't do that. We're trying to tell the congregation and have made that very clear in a number of ways. There is nothing off limits. Nothing at all. If it's not helping us advance Jesus' kingdom, building people up in it and reaching out to those that don't know him, we're not going to do it regardless if you have forever. And that's sometimes a hard conversation. And you're probably noting I'm not lovey-dovey in my approach. That's why I have a staff that's really good about, he just ran you over, but he still loves you, let me pick you up. That kind of thing. And that's true. If you've been on my staff, you know that. It's kind of straightforward, kind of no nonsense in that sense. But that's what works for us. And we continually pound that drum through all of the sermons, messages, through written stuff, through our blogs, because we want to educate people. And if you ask them, they'll tell you, oh, he's telling us again, what's the best way to? And they don't want to hear it, some. But it's helped us over the years really address some issues that you're going to see in a minute. Third one, drive everything back to the vision. I must admit, this is where I was pretty poor at times in my ministry, and it was painful lessons for me. When we first got to St. Mark back in the early 90s, God blessed us with rapid growth from two services to 5 in a 2-year or 3-year period. We went from small church where we actually one Christmas Eve had to lock the doors and not let people in because we were full. And I thought, we're never going to do that. So I didn't have a big problem moving a congregation that was right there next to Lambeau Field when it was St. Mark and Lambeau Field. That's it, out in the boonies. 8 miles down south. They understood that. We had to talk about keeping maybe a service there for those that founded the congregation at the original site. All right, we worked through all of that. That we had a number of things. Then we built onto the building only 4 years later because we ran out of room for things. And then we did a number of other things. And then all of a sudden, we had all those waves. And now we had a vision, but it wasn't very clear vision. Now it's pretty poor. I call it squirrel leadership. Anybody else here got ADD? It's shiny. Go, well, let's try that. Oh, that works. No, I just read about this. Let's try this. And my staff was going, can we go in one direction? Because I thought we were doing this now, and this was our emphasis. And for about a 4, 5, 6-year time, it was all over the place because we're trying to manage a larger congregation as well with understaffed like so many are. And it was just really poor leadership on my part. I finally sat down and I had someone talk to me, both from my schooling and some personal friends, and say, you got to rein us in. You got to give us a vision that we can follow you in. And you got to keep pounding that drum. And so we pound that drum, and you'll see the vision statement in a minute, through messages, through all the social media, to the point that we want even our preschoolers, we're asking them, what's the vision of the church? And they'll grow and go, because that's our t-shirt. It's grow and go. It's a little more than that. And I say, well, what does that mean? And they'll go, we have to grow about Jesus, and then we go tell people about Jesus. I was figuring, hey, if a preschooler gets it, most of the adults will too. So we're real happy about that. Here's some of the things we've had. That's what our vision statement is, to create communities where people can grow and go in Christ. Very simple, works for us. But now let me unpack that and see how we work it in our system, in our congregation. First thing is we want to try to offer compelling worship. What we mean by compelling worship, or at least my definition of compelling worship, the win is this. I want our people to be comfortable bringing other people they know who haven't ever set foot in a building, a church building. You know how that is. Maybe you're growing up as a kid and you had a friend you wanted to bring to church because the pastor said you should. And so you bring the kid to church, and what did you do? Oh, I hope he's not playing the organ. Or I hope he's not preaching. You're kind of embarrassed of your church. Since in our case, the vast majority of new people come because they've been invited or brought by others, we wanted to make sure we provided a place where they'd be happy and feel comfortable and not embarrassed. And we also wanted to provide a place and a service, and even the homiletical part, the preaching part, where the person who was there would say this, the unchurched person. I'm not sure I agree with everything you teach. In fact, I'm not sure I even know everything you teach. But I want to come back next week. That was the win for us. That was compelling worship. What else we notice is from our mission field, we have a lot of Catholics. And so when we were putting together, we went from all traditional to one traditional, all contemporary, because there are a lot of traditional churches around us, but they weren't reaching the age group of the 20 and 30-year-olds, and we thought, let's try that contemporary, and here we are today. But we thought, okay, how are we going to make sure we craft that? And we had a lot of Catholics coming in, great mission field, obviously, as you know, a lot of times falling away. And what they really appreciated was, quote, the contemporary music, whatever you want to define that as. But we also have a large number of evangelicals coming in now, left and right. And what they wanted is, they said, we really appreciate you having scripture readings, and even this thing called where you talk about your sin once in a while. The confession absence and those responses, and we have those in different forms, because they said in the services we grew up in, there's no meat. It was kind of like the band was a show, the pastor got up there, and that was it. We were gone. So we found out that for us, that was compelling worship. The thing we're doing right now is we're darkening our church. We got way too many lights, and people said, when I'm singing, I want to sing loudly, but I want the person next to me seeing me sing. I guess hearing isn't a problem, but just seeing them sing. But those things worked for us at this. Another thing we've done now, another part of it, because there's always major anchors to your vision statement, is to grow healthy adults. And this is probably where we've had the most growth and most pushback. We at St. Mark believe that children are best served when adults are spiritually well fed. That's a biblical principle that Lutherans don't hold to. We spend a lot of time teaching kids and playing with adults rather than playing with the kids and teaching the adults. And I don't know about you, but that has bothered me for a long time. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, after researching the history of confirmation in the Lutheran Church, which you research, if you want to know where it came from, it's kind of frightening, the whole practice. Not that we don't want people to know how to take the Lord's Supper. That's a good thing. I simply said, if we're going to do this, let's make sure we make the adults the primary teachers. At St. Mark, for example, we don't do the whole examination from the congregation. They come into the pastor's offices, one of our offices, and the child sits here, mom and dad sit here. We ask the parents 40 questions. We ask the child about 50. Any question the child can't get, we ask dad, because he's supposed to know. Now, if dad's not there, we ask mom. Questions like, give me the 4 reasons we baptize babies and the 2 reasons the Baptists don't. Question 1. That's doctrine. Then we do a lot of things like, your son's going off to high school. What's the one thing you want him to know about his Christian faith that's maybe going to be challenged that he needs you to help him with and to hold him accountable to? A lot of good questions. But we've now done confirmation where it's all the parents are doing it, and they do it, we put it all online for them. And because the parents are a little scared, a little nervous about that, because after all, we have a Lutheran elementary school in which they say, well, that's why we hired you, right? We hired you to train our kids. And sometimes the church has been guilty of setting that up because we say, you're supposed to teach your own kids. God says so. I mean, we got in Ephesians 6, you got Deuteronomy, all that. But it's too tough. Let the church professionals do it for you. Now, in some ministry areas, maybe that has to happen. But in mine, it doesn't. And so it was a slow go over the years, and now we finally progressed to they're doing it all online. But now we meet with the parents on a regular basis on Wednesday nights to review the messages coming up for them, as well as help them with how to share or how to study or how to teach. And I would love to tell you that's gone over just great. And the people who are the most that push back are the people who grew up having the pastor teach confirmation to them. And I said, I want the best for your child. I mean, that's a good way. I want the best for your child because all the empirical evidence I've studied has said it makes no difference whether a child goes through our Lutheran elementary schools or the public school, whether they're going to be faithful in their walk with Christ after high school. None. So let's stop pretending it does. If we can help mom and dad, that's better because you can do a great job, I can do a great job. Go back to dad and dad says, child comes up, hey dad, do you know what this answer to this Bible question is? Oh, I don't know that crap, ask your mom. All right, he just undid everything that you and I just did. So why don't we just follow the biblical principle, and that is, let's equip parents. Let's not scare them, right? Don't push it through the panic area. Let's not scare them. But let's stop putting them in the second role of the secondary trainer. They're called to be the first trainers. Let's support them, but let's put them in the proper place, and let's teach them how to be that. That's the best for the next generation. The other thing we did is the Sunday school model. If you read about how that started, that was really an evangelism outreach, or not first, it was really to teach kids that only had Sunday off how to read and write. But we've done away with that. We've slowly phased it out, and in its place put now a blossoming parenting ministry where we teach parents to be good parents. It's open to the community. We go from everything biblical to very practical. We have the police coming in this Thursday it is. 10 things a police officer wants parents to know right now. We've had how to have a home devotion, how to, all the different things. But we're really now hell-bent, in a certain sense, on helping equip parents better. Third one, we've done, got to check there. Third one is, or the last one is LES. And that's the elephant in the room. The Lutheran elementary school is a wonderful tool and can be used as such, but unfortunately many parents don't. They use it as an ecclesiastical crutch, or a substitute parent, where they think they've done their God-given job by putting their children in our schools. And that's it. Hey, I have really good teachers in my school, really good principal, really good people. But they've been called to help the parents. And so we're looking at restructuring how we fund it because we spend, again, it's good, but not the best. We spend an incredible amount of dollars teaching children who know Jesus how to add rather than teaching children who know how to add about Jesus. And I maintain we've been called to do the latter. Now, the other was nice to offer, and it's a great tool and can be used well, but I don't know. I don't know that it always is being. So that's us. One more for you. Intentionally serve others in Jesus' name. That's the anchor for us to grow and go. A couple things. When we built the church, we wanted to make sure we were in the community and of the community. All the blood drives are at St. Mark. The polling center is at St. Mark. The driver's ed is at St. Mark, so every kid knows where St. Mark is there. We have the food pantry for De Beer in Wrightstown. That's at St. Mark. We used to, now we don't anymore, but the Packers Christmas Cancer Kids Night, where all the Packers come and they help kids with cancer. We just made it a place where people can always come because we wanted to be in the community as well. Youth ministry we have done away with because we don't believe it's really effective. It's the best way to disciple kids by having them come in, do a devotion, and then the egg and armpit relay. What we believed is the M&M theory. And the M&M theory is this. We're going to mentor kids, sometimes one-on-one, because some don't have good dads or moms. And we want to help them. And we're help moms and dads as well. We do a lot of mentoring now, a lot of one-on-one. It's labor and staff intensive. We're understaffed. We're working on that. And the second thing is we do missions, because we believe if we send a kid on a mission, we change that kid forever, as well as that kid gets a chance to change someone else's eternal address forever. They just came back from Buffalo, New York. Now I'm sending 28 teens to Buffalo, New York, couple counselors. I didn't know. I was sending them to a place where the police do not go on a regular basis. They told me when they got back. I said, okay. What's interesting is they're painting houses, and at night they're having devotions. And they said the thing that made the impact, and we have all these testimonials from the kids, is not the fact that next door was a house of ill repute, right? And we had to go over, our Tad Schubring, our youth minister, had to go over to the pimp and say, could you please stop having people walk and use the alley, because we're using that alley? You know, that's where that was. It was very interesting, because I'm sure the kids never forgot about that. And the boys mentioned they met two neighbors, one named Bambi and one Glitter. So and I'm pretty sure they'll never forget that mission trip. But the great thing about their mission trip was that they said, we started out, Pastor, we only had like 12 people the first night when we had a devotion, and it was kids-led devotion. By the end, they had 40, 45 neighbors. And when I have a 14 or 15-year-old, who, especially males, come back and go, this changed my life. You know, you want to shake them and go, do I know you, right? But it changed her. And so we're all into M&M. It's M&M theology in that sense. We just opened up about 4 months ago a child care, a 150 child capacity child care. That is the only Christian child care that large in the whole area. In 2 months' time, finally, we have 34 kids, none of whom is churched. Yeah, when we hit the 45 mark, I believe, or 46 mark, it'll then start paying us back. It costs $250,000 to renovate something that was built 5 or 6 years ago, because I guess the codes changed. Wonderful. We're going to probably have a video venue there, and we're looking for another video venue probably in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe one even at our Green Bay site to better utilize that site, which has now changed from old white Roman Catholics to African American and Latin first home buyers, which is a really good opportunity for us, a very good opportunity for us. I guess just one thing that I'm going to share with you at the end here, and I know I probably got some time, is why we do this and why I do this. I grew up in Compton, South Central Los Angeles, not from a pastor's family, but I was impacted by the very same message that we share. We have the privilege of sharing, and it's this. I'll sum it up this way. Calvin Miller tells his story, true story, of a boy who was handicapped. He's a second grader, and every day he'd walk to school. It was about a quarter of a mile away, maybe a little longer, and he'd limp all the way there. And he was the kid that the other kids really kind of didn't deal with. They were kind of mean to, and you know how second graders, sometimes they can be kind of mean, especially the boys. He was always the last one picked for kickball, and no one sat next to him at the lunchroom table. No one really picked him to be their partner or anything else. He was always kind of left out. And you know, he'd come back from school with his backpack and limp all the way back to his house. Well, it came time, it was January, and the teacher discussed the fact that, remember, in February, we're going to go ahead and have our Valentine's Day party. He's pretty excited about this, really loved his classmates. And so for all of January, he made handmade Valentines for every single one of his classmates. Really excited. The day had finally come. It was going to be the next day. That was Valentine's Day. So the morning of Valentine's Day, he carefully packs all of the handmade Valentines into his backpack. And he limps off to class, excited. What he didn't know was that some of the boys in the class had told the others, hey, don't give, his name's Jimmy, don't give Jimmy a Valentine. Let's just see what happens. Don't give Jimmy a Valentine. Very mean. Very mean. So the time came. Valentines were handed out, and he handed all his out. He didn't receive one Valentine. 3:10, the bell rang, zipped up his backpack, headed back home. And as he's walking home that day, limping along, he keeps mumbling the same thing. Not one. Not one. Not a single one. Not one. Not one. Not a single one. He went up the stairs of his house, opened the door, kind of walked past his mom in the living room, and then started up the stairs to his bedroom, mumbling, and his mom stopped him. His mom said, hey, honey, how'd it go today? And he looked at his mom and he said, not one. Not one. Not a single one. I made sure every one of my classmates got a Valentine. I didn't miss a single one. I have to believe that when Jesus ascended to heaven, his discussion with the Father was something like this. Father, not one. Not one. Not a single one. I died for them all. That's why we're here.